Welcome to Ethical Edge Insights, Conversations with Changemakers, a space for deeply reflective conversations with those shaping our world. Here we explore their journeys, their greatest challenges, their most significant contributions to date, the contributions they seek to make, and how ethics have shown up along the way. Join us as we uncover the stories that shape our shared future. So, welcome and hello, Jeff. So my name's Wendy Ann from the Ethical Edge Insights, and I'm going to be speaking to Jeff, who's the CEO. Is that correct, Jeff?
Executive Director.
Executive Director of the IOC, Institute of Coaching. And we're going to be having a chat and exploring more and learning more about Jeff across the little while. So the first question I'd like to put to you is just to tell us a little bit more about you currently, where you're at, what you're up to.
Currently, kind of dividing up my time into three buckets. As Executive Director of the Institute of Coaching, we have a team of, 15 or so, affiliated with Harvard Medical School and the McLean Mass General Hospital System in Boston, where we sponsor research on the science underpinnings of coaching as a profession. And then we try to translate research into educational programs through roundtable discussions, webinars, seminars, a whole portfolio of activities for a community of about 5,000 worldwide. So part of my time is spent being in a sort of strategy leadership role, I guess you'd call it, for a nonprofit, which I very much enjoy. And then about a third of my time is spent coaching. So I still do as much coaching as I can find time for, and as clients will have me around the world, leadership coaching in different industries. A whole range of industries. And then the other third is finishing up the touches on a book that my third book, which will be out with my co-author, Margaret Moore, who is the founder of the Institute, one of the founders of the Institute of Coaching. And we have a book coming out this spring called The Science of Leadership, 9 Ways to Expand Your Impact, which is a highly accessible way to translate some of the latest research in leadership effectiveness with coaching stories that show kind of a coaching mindset around effective leadership, and then practices, so that some of this wonderful academic research that's being done these days around how to be an effective leader that no one reads will actually be accessible to people that are busy doing that job. That's our intention anyway.
Fabulous.
So that all keeps me rather busy.
Yeah, I'm sure. And just, I've not written a book, but I've edited a couple, and I know the time that they take. So I can't imagine the time it takes to actually invest in writing something. So I look forward to it. We'll get a review done for the Ethical Edge Insights later.
Yeah, the irony is the writing of the book is actually one of the shortest parts of the process.
Okay.
Getting a book contract takes forever.
Yeah.
And then getting a publisher to actually publish the book once they have said yes also takes a long time. I find the actual writing of the book is probably one of the easiest parts.
Who's it published with?
Barrett Kohler.
Okay.
In San Francisco. Yeah.
So I know who to come tapping on for a contact if I need one, if I happen to get courage up to do a book.
I'm happy to support folks that want to take on that arduous task. Yes.
Yeah. I'm being a bit cheeky
there. I mean, you have a book, obviously. You've been author of multiple compendia of book articles. So I would imagine there's a book in there coming soon.
Possibly. I do have a couple of ideas actually, but I'm not sure when I'll get the time to do them. So, I mean, you and I have had a couple of chats in recent times, and you're part of the advisory team of the Coaching Ethics Forum. And so we've always enjoyed the Institute of Coaching support for that work, which is part of how Ethical Edge Insights has come to be as well. So what about where you came from? And I'm happy for you to start wherever it makes logical sense for you, wherever you're comfortable. Some people have started way back a long, long time ago, and others have stayed strictly on a career path. But it's nice to know where you've come from to bring you to where you are today.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's always hard to know where to start with that kind of question, but I mean, I'm maybe ironic in my view of my past, but I tend to see my entire trajectory as a series of failures from which I then bounced back and turned it into something else.
Brilliant.
So I was a failed liberal arts grad. I remember getting a degree in music and philosophy and not being able to get a job. So I took a test to be a computer programmer and failed. So that was my first. I was always really smart until I started failing things over and over again as an adult. Um, so I failed that, although, computers even then, quite a few years ago, were the thing to do, as they still are. So that didn't work out. So then I tried business and did an MBA, and then was terrible at all the different components of that too, including accounting and finance. Oh my God. So I ended up in HR, which I was relatively good at. That led to my being asked to mentor and coach senior executives. I was working for a consulting firm, Booz Allen and Hamilton at the time. And I was a disaster at that because they were very toxic and I was not trained. So I was way over my head. So that led to my deciding I better get some training. So that led to my becoming a PhD in psychology. So you can see how the theme, I fail and then I overcome, as they
Yeah.
say. The PhD in psychology was great, amazing experience. I look back on it as a really, really important part of my path. I then tried my chops at being a licensed psychotherapist in New York, and I failed at that because I got incredibly bored, to be honest. Um, Not because I didn't respect the work or my patients, but I loved my patients, but I didn't have the patience, if you know what I mean. Having worked in the corporate world, I tended to be very results oriented. And my supervisor at the time, I'll always remember, basically said to me, Jeff, you need to slow down. People in therapy need years of work. And I was like, no, 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 no. I don't want to work with these people for years. I think my favorite memory of that is the Bob Newhart show. Well, I'm dating myself when he had a patient and his therapy was just to tell them to stop doing what you're doing. Anyway, my 3-year stint in therapy ended um, rather unglamorously, and I decided I needed to do something else, and that led me to coaching, which is sort of a segue from business to therapy to coaching. And the rest is history. I mean, that is my most recent of the three paths, my liberal arts to business to psychology to, I guess it's more than three. But I've been coaching now for many years and love it. And I think I'm very well suited to positive psychology because I tend to be focused on the future and focused on building resilience and working from strengths with people. I love Marty Seligman's work on flourishing and all of the work that others like Gabriella Kellerman and others have done around that. Robert Bieswastiner and his positive psychology work. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm very much in the right lane finally, but it took me quite a few hiccups along the way. So I guess that's the answer to that question.
So how did you come to be so involved with the Institute of Coaching?
I guess I would answer that one by saying that things sort of maybe reversed a little bit in the last 10 or so years for me, in that um, I volunteered initially to support them in developing education programs because I really believed that the science underpinning effective coaching was still young, needed to be developed. And not just like you and I have talked about this, not unlike what you think needs to happen with ethics, I think needed to happen 10 or 15 years ago with coaching. Um, and then what I mean by role reversal is instead of me failing, a lot of the people around me started to not succeed. And so I was kind of the last man standing when it came time for leadership roles. Um, and I wasn't aspiring to be the executive director of the Institute of Coaching, but after going through some hiccups with other folks, I had been around a long time. I understood the dynamics of, a nonprofit team and how they work. And so the founders, Carol Kaufman and Margaret Moore and Susan David, are all very dear friends. They kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, "We don't want that job. Do you want it?" But they're happy to be my advisors and colleagues and support.
Nice.
So that's kind of how that all evolved. And I love being part, as I'm sure you do, with the ethics foundation that you started. I love being part of the evolution of the coaching profession. It feels valuable. It feels like we're really making a difference. I know you are in that work, and I feel like we are in the science. So yeah, I mean, it may have taken me a while to find the lane. I don't know if you had that experience, but it feels good when you finally do sort of settle into the niche that you were probably supposed to be doing, but it took you years and years and years to figure it out.
It's interesting you say that, if I can just share, because I recall when I wanted to do this stuff with the forum, but not knowing what it was going to be, but I just knew I had to tap into ethics. And then I did the first conference, and I remember talking to a friend and I said, "I'm really worried." I said, "I've got a book coming out on ethics. I've got this conference that people loved." And I said, "People are going to think that I'm the ethics person, but I'm not. I'm the coaching psychologist, positive psychologist person. I don't think I'm very comfortable being known as an ethics person." And it took me a while to actually get comfortable with that and realize that it's okay. I can still, it, because I am known for the ethics space, increasingly so, I recognize that. But it doesn't mean I've let go of those other parts of my work that I love, that I've identified with my whole career, and that is coaching psychology, as opposed to coaching in it of itself, and then the positive psychology elements, because I was lecturing on positive psychology and coaching psychology, the integration of them 20 years ago at the University of Wollongong. And I was quite astounded when I realized just recently that were probably the first lectures of that integration ever.
Wow.
Time, and I didn't know that. Yeah. I was just doing what was kind of natural to me. So I understand where you're coming from, whether you kind of you fall into something, but you don't realize that you were meant to maybe fall into it. And I've had to become more comfortable with what that meant for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can appreciate that. I mean, I'm always a little taken aback when people ask me if I still do coaching.
Uh,
And I'm like, what do you mean? Of course I still do coaching. That's my bread and butter. And yeah, but you're the leader of this international nonprofit, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, but that's a sideline. I've been a leadership coach. So you're right. It's like the perception of others becomes related to what you're sort of known for. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm proud of being that, just as you should be proud of being known for ethics, but we're all much more than just the job titles, right?
Yeah. So here's a tricky question that'll challenge your very strong sense of humility.
Okay.
So you've got a long career in coaching, and it's not just all in the Institute of Coaching, and you've done great stuff at the Institute as well. What do you think at this point would you say has been your most significant contribution to the coaching space or even the leadership space? You can position that wherever you want. Maybe it was in your therapeutic space. You never know what might throw up.
Hmm. My greatest contribution?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a tough question.
Or change it greatest to important, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I think the two things that I feel most proud of in my role here at the Institute of Coaching and in my maybe in my persona from writing and teaching is the integration of coaching with leadership. Um, I think that there was a time when coaching was kind of unknown and sort of a sideline, and people would say, "Well, what is that?" And you know, um, it's not really that long ago. I mean, as recently as maybe 10 years ago, there was in the if you get out of our circles of
Mm-hmm.
professional coaches and ICF and IOCs and all of that, you'd find that the vast majority of people were still asking the basics, like what is life coaching and why do people need coaches and all of that. So I feel like I've been a part. I'm not necessarily the leader, and there are a lot of other folks that have been as much on the bandwagon as myself and maybe even have higher profile. But I feel like I've made a contribution to the recognition by folks in the leadership space that coaching is really valuable, really makes a difference in people's lives, both personally, professionally, and especially coming out of the pandemic, um, that human centered leadership is not just a nice to have, and coaching is a really key component of human centered leadership. And I feel like I'm a major proponent of that, and I've been part of that conversation and raising the visibility, I guess, of that in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Still needs to happen, on a bigger scale, as we all know, but I do feel like I've been part of that evolution. I don't think people really question whether coaching is a valuable modality anymore. I think they take it for granted, and most people want coaching. Now, today's question is, are they going to get it from a bot or an AI or a person? Those kinds of things. But the days of whether coaching is even worthwhile have long since been eclipsed. And many of my clients are asking me to do work around things like leader as coach, coaching them to be a better leader, but also coaching them to be a coach. So that to me is a sign of success and of contribution.
What do you think, or what have you found to be some of the challenges those leaders have had when they've moved into having a coaching role within their leadership?
Um, I mean, there's so many, it's hard to list them, but uh, the pace of change, which is a cliche, but cliches are often based on some level of reality. It's not easy for leaders to keep up with demographic changes, cultural changes, political changes. The landscape in which they operate is just really, really challenging. There's no stability at this point. I think anyone who tells you otherwise is living more in fantasy than in reality. I do think one of the most challenging, I know for myself as a leader, it's right at the top of my list, is virtual work as a leader is extremely difficult to be effective in mastering the desire to provide autonomy that people have come to expect coming out of the pandemic, and the freedom to have a sense of empowerment in today's knowledge roles, knowledge worker kinds of roles, but at the same time, as a leader, to hold people accountable and to ensure some ethics to your specialty are being attended to. Yeah, that's extremely challenging because, you know, you as a leader, you want to trust people. On the other hand, not everyone is trustworthy. And knowing the difference is not always easy through Zoom. So that's a tangible example that I know I feel at times, but it's one of many. I mean, there are just so many challenges.
What about the switch from, and maybe it's not a switch, from being the leader to then switching to the coach approach within their leadership? Is there anything that kind of arises in that that's tricky for people to make that transition?
Yes, I think the core of what you're asking about is power dynamics, right? Because at the end of the day, the most effective coaching dynamic, whether you're a coach with a client or a leader with an employee, is to consciously step into more of a partnership level and see each other as equals. And so it really becomes a duality and a dialogue as opposed to a boss and a subordinate or a client and a coach. But those power dynamics are very difficult to dissolve. They don't dissolve just naturally. It's like if you can tell when you're coaching, you can tell your client, I'm just going to be your partner. But the reality is that they know that you're being paid. So there's an element of where's the money coming from? So there's something in the background that may not be spoken. They know that you're the expert on some level. So that creates a power dynamic, whether you like it or not. Likewise, when you're a leader as coach, you can say to your staff, oh, I'm going to put my coach hat on now. We're going to do coaching. But, you know, it's not that simple. They're sitting there across from you literally or through the Zoom lens or Teams lens, and they're thinking to themselves, really? Okay, we're equals now, right? You're taking off the boss hat and you're putting on the coach hat. Can I let down my hair and really just be myself? This is a complex transition for leaders and for coaches. But those that can do that well will, I think, be more successful as a coach or as a leader to really, and to my mind, part of the way you do that is you speak to it. You recognize that it's there. It gets back to my training as a psychologist, as a psychotherapist, that there's always transference. Yeah. And you don't have to get into a discussion with your patient about what is transference, but it does help them to be aware of the fact that the dynamic between us may have a little bit of your parents. It may look like a sibling. You know, I may be your best friend sometimes. You may be mad at me because I'm doing daddy, you know, whatever it is. but at least we can talk about it. We can acknowledge that that is in there,
Mm.
projection. So helping leaders be better at identifying those reactive moments and how that's playing out, just as we do with coach training, I think helps us to be better coaches and helps us to be better leaders.
Yeah, it's making the unconscious or implicit conscious and explicit,
Exactly.
and trying to maneuver the power plays around that. It, just as you were describing that, I was thinking, Jeff and Margaret need to come and speak about this at the forum this year, because the forum is all about power. I just thought, what a great take. And I'm not meant to be thinking about the programming the conference. So there we go. But it'd be a great topic.
Yeah, and ethics plays right into that.
Yeah.
I knew one of your questions because you sent me some previews of questions, and one of your questions was what ethical, wasn't there one about what ethical dilemma I might have run into in my practice or something like that?
So, where does ethics show up in your decision making? We kind of leaned into that a little bit there, but not explicitly to your decision making, is a question that I have for you, if you want to give that a go.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was thinking about my coaching practice and where ethics has come up for me.
Mm.
Um, and there were a few examples that came to mind immediately. The one that was probably the most painful for me was uh, a situation where I was coaching a leader and then having a very successful, or what I thought was quite a successful engagement. And then he asked me to coach the team.
Mhm.
And it seemed like a no-brainer. But the dynamic shifted so dramatically once I started coaching the other 5 people that reported to him that it became a morass of complexity. And it became a lot about, well, what are you telling this person? And please don't tell this person this thing. And I know you're talking to this person. And at the end of the day, I finally had to go to the boss, the person who was hiring me and leading the dynamic, and say, I really don't think it's appropriate for me to coach all these other, as much as I love getting paid for coaching 6 people instead of one. It was just a ethical dilemma waiting to happen. And I feel like it was appropriate to short circuit it before it did.
Mhm.
Because, and I think a lot of coaches run into this situation where they get success, they get asked to do more, but the more complexity um, brings up more possibilities of running into ethical snafus.
Yeah.
And since then, I have really learned to keep team coaching as a particular venue
Mm.
and individual coaching as a particular venue. And I will coach 2 or 3 people within a team, but they will, it's very clear at the outset that's the engagement, as opposed to what I did, which became problematic, which was, oh, I'm coaching the boss, and now I'm all of a sudden going to coach the team. The team knows I coach the boss. The team is like, I don't feel safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a good ethical learning for me.
I love them because that's where we learn the most, in the most strongest way, I think, is when we
Absolutely, right.
encounter this
And if
difference.
you're lucky enough to catch it before it gets you in trouble, then it's
On the bum. Yeah. So describe a time when something arose, like, I mean, that was a circumstance that arose, which I don't know how challenging it was for you. I mean, I guess you could have lost some income from having to speak up about it. But in your role as a leader now, what are some of the challenges that are arising for you now in this day and age that you struggle with a little bit, or that you actually have been able to walk through?
I think the one right now, current in my mind, is um, trying to navigate the political environment. I mean, I'm an American, whether no matter which side of the political landscape you're on, you're likely reeling from the change in direction that's happened in the US. And it has global ramifications because everything that comes out of America impacts the whole world, whether we like it or not. And I have had a number of my team basically say to me, we have our DEI discussion group, we have an LGBTQ plus discussion group for coaches. We should be putting out statements around our support for this kind of work, inclusion and belonging and equity. And we are affiliated with Harvard, so I always direct folks to say to be aligned with our affiliated academic institutions. And but to be honest, some of those statements come out of those institutions are rather bland and non-statements. And that does feel like a bit of an ethical dilemma. I have strong values myself personally,
Mm.
and but I also recognize that even if I'm an executive director and I have my own personal views, that doesn't give me the platform to use the Institute of Coaching to profess those views. So I think that's something that all leaders have to step back and think about. I can live out my personal values in many ways, but I don't necessarily have to put them into a public forum. But this is a difficult time for many of us. And I'm surprised because I will sometimes assume that I know what someone's personal values are. And I'll jokingly say, oh, well, you must be upset about X, Y, and Z that's going on. And they kind of look at me and say, well, actually, I think it's kind of really good. And I'm like, oh, okay. So maybe I should stop talking and listen. Maybe I need to learn rather than assume. So, yeah, I think in these pivotal moments where economic or political landscapes shift, it can be challenging ethically to navigate your personal values versus what's to be publicly or promulgated. I don't have the perfect answer for that, but I do think it's a challenge that I'm feeling and that probably many people at leadership levels in organizations are feeling. Definitely in the US, probably maybe, but it may be more pronounced right now because of the new administration in the US, but I'm sure it's alive in most countries these days that we're responding to a lot of these kinds of shifts in the zeitgeist, I guess I would say. And many of my clients are global corporates. So they're not really American. They're companies that have divisions all over the world. They have people from all sorts of countries. And it's not easy. If you're running an organization that has a huge Chinese division, for example, or a big Indian division, one of my good friends runs a company or is a senior executive at a company that has over 500 employees in India. And it's very challenging because there's so many cultural nuances. And it's not like you can make these blanket statements about the environment of your employment. Or likewise, many of the companies do a lot of business in China. They do a lot of business in the Middle East. They do a lot of business in Africa. So, yeah, these are challenging ethical dilemmas that we're
Yeah, and it
grappling
is,
with.
and it's, I think for people like I know that you're in Europe, but that you're American, so you're impacted specifically so by the local stuff over the last couple of weeks, which has kind of knocked everyone reeling a little bit with how much and what's been happening. And it's a bit hard to keep up with it. And so I think we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace to try and take some time to grapple with how do we show up as heads of institutions to then make the right call in the tone and the voice that we do have. Personally, I think we have to have the voice. We just have to hit it with the right note, to showcase the values of the institution that you lead.
I agree. And also pick our battles.
Yeah.
Not every single thing is worth having uh, getting up in arms about. But it's a matter of letting the dust settle, and then because some of the ultimate goals of these changes may ultimately be good for either US or good for the world. You never know. It's just a matter. It's a bit of a tsunami at the moment, and so it's like take a breath. Let's see what the fallout is, and but it does ask us all, I think, to reflect on our values
Mm.
and get grounded in terms of what we most care about. I always think of indigenous approaches like the 7 generation mindset that Native Americans would have. How does this play out 7 generations from now?
Mm.
Not just tomorrow.
Yeah.
Um, so,
And we can't predict that either. So how do you know how they work with that then?
I mean, it depends probably on the tribes or
Mm-hmm.
indigenous communities that are um, reflecting that way, but I think they're asking themselves the questions um, and playing roles. Like, you know, they go around a circle and think about how the child mind might think about this, how the adult mind might think about this, how grandfather or wise elder or ancestors would think about this. So it's like putting it in a long trajectory of impact.
And that's
And
what we do in coaching. In fact, some of us, anyway, we take the perspective of various peoples, which, depending on the scenario you're talking about. So it's quite powerful. There's lots of alignment there with the coaching space.
yeah, absolutely. And it encourages us to step back and be less reactive. It's not so much about what's happening in the moment, but
Mm-hmm.
what is the ripple effect? One of my favorite studies was done by Sean O'Connor and his colleagues in Australia. Um, and they studied how coaching impacts the people around them. You
Mm-hmm.
probably are familiar with that. And I love that because it's so powerful to see, evidence that what we're doing, it's almost like the quantum. You start to think about the quantum connections between people across a landscape, that what's happening is not just happening right here and now, but it's also rippling out. And when it's positive, when it's having a ethically, um, when it has integrity, then it has a ripple effect that's positive, impacting employees, impacting the culture, impacting the institution, and so on. So, yeah, I think that coaching is right, absolutely aligned with that way of seeing our role in the world.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is one of the biggest challenges you've got at the moment, um, within the working space?
Personally, or in terms of the
It can be, yeah, it's something that you're navigating. So whichever way you want to frame that.
um I think that I'm navigating. I mean, I recently moved to Europe, and for the first couple of years that I was here, I think I felt like a tourist. I'm very blessed to have moved to Amsterdam, which is one of those cities where you can be a tourist for years because it's just so beautiful and there's so much richness in terms of culture and museums and arts, and so easy to see other countries right around the corner, whether it's Belgium or France or Germany or Norway or Denmark. And but after a couple of years, you realize you live here. And so for me personally, there is a desire to build community, to feel like a sense of belonging, um, find the balance between connection to my home, because I'm still an American, and also building a sense of camaraderie and community impact. Like I really am always the kind of person that likes to have a sense of making a difference where I live in the communities that I live.
Mhm.
Um, and that does actually connect. That's my personal journey, I think, kind of moving from being the expat tourist to being that actual person who lives here. And now I need to become part of the community. And how do I do that? So that's my personal level, but it's also a broader um, initiative for me, which is to build the community of coaches in Europe and to be more impactful on that space. And in some ways, that feels easier because I have colleagues that I can call upon to support me. But I do see them as sort of two sides of the same coin, building a
Yeah.
sense of community and making a difference where we live and where I live. So that's kind of what's up for me right now. Um,
Yeah. Well, I empathize with you, because I'm Australian in France, and so
right, that's true.
even though I've been here a long time, France is a particularly challenging country to build a community around if you want a francophone community.
Mm.
Um, so it's very challenging. So I can empathize.
What do you how would you characterize it? What makes it challenging in particular in France versus other places?
Well, you need to learn the rules of engagement for relationships. Basically, they go about them differently. They work with them differently. Um, they have different degrees of closeness and distance, depending on time, depending on lots of different factors, which is entirely different for an Australian. Like an Australian will open up the door because they see someone needing some help or just feeling down and say, come on in and have a barbecue with us. And you might feel like their best friend for that whole barbecue, but you're not really their best friend, but they just let you in
Right.
so much. So whereas the French who haven't traveled don't do that. That is not what happens. But when you do get let in, then you are like family. But it takes a long while to do that. So it's quite different. Yeah. But then those who have traveled are more open to people who are not French, particularly if you're Australian, because there's this kind of exoticness about being from so far away.
Right.
Yeah. So it's just learning the rules of engagement and to really do what you need to do to buffer yourself against the things that you kind of might start going through your head, because things can be difficult. I actually wrote for a magazine called the Expatriates Magazine, and some of what I wrote was most definitely around my experiences, even though I didn't write it from the first person. And it was about having a Christmas in Paris
Mm.
on your own. It was about trying to build friendships on your own and what that was like and how lonely and that can be.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting time. So, but you need to join groups, is my word of advice. Join groups.
I agree. Or form them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that is the challenge and that is the opportunity. Um,
Mhm.
I
So,
mean, for me, the good news is that New York City, which is where I lived for 20 years before moving here, was also not an easy place to build community. So And I'm from Boston, which is another city that's not easy. So I'm not entirely surprised that it's a challenge here. In some ways, uh, Amsterdam is easier
Mm,
because there are so many expats. It's so international.
mm,
Um, the hardest part is integrating with the Dutch themselves
exactly. Yeah.
and even finding them because the Dutch kind of hide out, especially in Amsterdam, as much as they are very open minded, probably compared to the French. Um, but they have their Calvinistic. They're filled with paradox, just like the rest of us.
Yeah.
So
It's fascinating when you start digging around. That's an interesting convergence of the two spaces of life, the two primary spaces of life, the personal life and the professional life, for them to converge on this wanting to build community, which is interesting, but you'll have to go about it differently, or maybe not. Maybe there are some similarities there, things you can cross over between the two. So I have another question, because I do want to get through all my questions.
okay.
And that is that what do you hope to be your legacy? What would you like to be your legacy for your professional life?
Wow. So that's one of those, what do you want written on your gravestone kind of job questions.
Sounds like a coaching question, doesn't it?
um, I'm hoping to say that it's too early to be thinking about that, but it's a challenge. I mean, I guess I look at the coaching profession as one that uh, barely existed 20, 25 years ago, other than maybe in the athletic space,
Mm,
coach for Olympic athletes or something. Um, and so definitely having had an impact on turning coaching into a profession
mm,
and leaving it as something that uh, supports really helping people fulfill their complete and manifest their potential in the world. And also having, I feel like I'm really interested in leadership and community, and um, if I can have a impact on helping individual leaders to be better, but also to move us toward a level of consciousness where we shift away from short-term thinking and from more destructive ways of being on the planet, if it's not too late. Um, it's certainly my intention to, yeah, to move the ball forward towards a regenerative or an eco-sustainable or whatever language you want to use for um, a more respectful and aligned way of being in the world.
mm,
Um, I always reflect on the fact that we live on basically a dirt ball, in the middle of who knows where. And so we don't know why we're here. We don't know what this dirt ball is all about, but we do know that what we're doing to it is really not very healthy. And as we try to get more healthy within our own systems, I hope that as leaders and as coaches, we pay equal attention or maybe even greater attention to the systems in which we operate, of which the natural world is probably it's really what sustains us, right? The air, the water, the land, the animals, the
mm,
non-human, beyond human. Um, seems to me that any legacy that doesn't attend to that at this level, at this point in time, is sort of moot, you know. I mean, clearly you want to leave a legacy for your family, but that legacy also would include that we take care of our planet more effectively than we are doing right now, right?
Mm.
So I'll do my little part, I guess.
I think it's really nice to hear what people's current passion is about what they, where the imprint that they'd like to have. And slightly on the same kind of topic, maybe in the same similar lane, but perhaps not. It is about, what do you think is the most pressing issue for our times today? And how are we addressing that?
Well, yeah, it is along the same lines. I think this is a conversation that I have with my co-author, Margaret Moore, around this leadership book that we're going to be putting out. The way organizations are operating today is not, in many cases, living up to the health and well-being needs of the humans, which is why I'm interested in human-centered leadership.
Mm.
And that's within the ecosystem of institutions, but it's also not living up to the level of nurturing and support and health for the planet, as we just mentioned. So, we really need to have a new level of consciousness. And the question becomes, what are we going to do to break through to that level? I think that in some ways it's returning. It's not really a new level of consciousness. I often find that when I read Indigenous work,
Mm.
and you from Australia, you may have heard of Tyson Yunkaporta, who's an Aboriginal professor, and who wrote an amazing series of books on the Aboriginal view of nature and the world, um, and then Native American, and then there's certainly the wisdom of the Tao that goes back thousands of years in China. So some of this wise way of seeing our role in the world and our connection to the planet has been around for a long time. And it's emerging in quantum physics, moving away from Newtonian separation
Mhm.
and recognizing that we are part of the system. We're not separate from it. We're not controlling it. And how do we then, as leaders, how do we then have a consciousness of that's embodiment and alignment and working with nature as opposed to against her? Because we are nature, right? So that I think is the next frontier. And there's a big role for coaches to play in that, and there's an even bigger role for leaders to play in that. We're really beginning to tap out what capitalism has brought to. I mean, it's great that there's zillionaires, but this sort of taps itself out at a certain point. There's only so many $400,000, $400 million yachts you can own. Like, I sort of always wonder, well, what do you do when you have all the toys? Like, isn't it time to step back and think about doing something else with your precious time here on the planet?
Mm.
So that's my soapbox, I guess.
I like it. So we've moved from the beginnings of coaching to a reawakening of consciousness founded on Indigenous beliefs and ways of being in the world. And we're going to finish our talk with that. And I want to say thank you so much for the chat. It's been fun and interesting. I love it with all of you, actually. I get to know you all in a little bit different ways. And it's very curious conversations that we're having. So thank
Great.
you.
Well, my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity. I think what you and the um, Ethics Forum are doing and the publications, um, Ethical Edge Insights, and everything that you're putting out is pretty extraordinary. And so you have my vote of support. So I think it's really important. To me, what you've taken on is very well timed, because I think that we've now reached a point in the coaching profession where we do have good scientific foundations, and now we need to have equally good value-based foundations, and ethics is a really key component of that. So
Mhm.
your timing is good, your work is excellent, and I am here to support you in any way I can.
Thank you so much. That's really kind. Do you see the new logo over there in the corner?
I do. It's very nice. You're good at that kind of stuff.
I'm a little bit creative. This is true.
Well, keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Jeff.